Is there a disconnect between Brian Kelly and his players? That's the subject of one national report. I've got my thoughts. We're talking about it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, so please subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Is Caden Durham RB1? Brian Kelly answers that question. Maybe not the way LSU fans would hope, but Kelly does say the Tigers are close to a breakthrough. Is he right? We'll get there. But I want to start today with a report from CBS Sports and John Talty that certainly has turned a lot of heads and caught my attention. And it was actually in direct contrast to how Brian Kelly started his Monday press conference after the South Carolina win. First, let me read for you what John Talty reported. And if you're not familiar with who John is, John's a reporter and a very good one. He worked for AL.com and is now at CBS Sports. Wrote a book with Armin Katayan about Nick Saban. He's a New York Times bestseller. John is a very good reporter. He's very good at his job. He's been on my radio show many times over the years. I have a lot of respect for John professionally. He does a very good job. Which is why this is a little perplexing for me. And it's not necessarily just the content, but the nature of the report. I'll read for you this one line. So John has a piece, and it's a column. It's an opinion piece. And the title, the headline is LSU lucky to escape South Carolina, but Tigers facing deeper disconnect. What's not adding up? And he goes through a lot of different things, play calling, the whole thing, whatever. And there's a point late in the piece where he writes, and I'm quoting, multiple industry sources familiar with LSU, whatever that means, told CBS Sports on Saturday they believe the on-field issues are a result of a disconnect between Kelly and his LSU players, with his personality and style not resonating as well in Baton Rouge as it did in South Bend. Okay, couple things. I understand that in this business, a lot of times reports are anonymous. It's just kind of the nature of how business is done now in media. I don't like it. I really I hate that that's part of our industry that's just accepted, because people read that and they just accept it as gospel without actually looking deeper. First, I think you have to look at the reporter. And I told you I do like John Talty a lot. I think he's very good at what he does. He has good information. What I don't like about it is how he phrases his source. Multiple industry sources familiar with LSU. Now, what in the world does that mean? Industry sources familiar with LSU. That could be anything. That could be a member of the national media, an industry source. Is that an analyst at another school who might have spent some time at LSU a decade ago? It could mean anything to say an industry source familiar with LSU. And to report that, and to not actually go ask Brian Kelly or someone associated with LSU for a response, in my opinion, is very poor judgment. If you're going to report that, you've got to at least go to the source and give them an opportunity to answer to that. And who knows what they may not say anything, but at least you've given them the opportunity to speak on it. And then to say his personality and style are not resonating as well in Baton Rouge as it did in South Bend. Did it really resonate in South Bend? I mean, Brian Kelly in South Bend was known as a red-faced, screaming guy. And anyway, listen, here's the point I'll make about any report ever about someone's opinions of a coach. And I'm going to take this example and move it away from sports so that way it can resonate a bit more. You went to school somewhere. You and I both went to school somewhere. You probably had a teacher that you liked that a lot of people in the school didn't like. Or flip it around. A very popular teacher that maybe you didn't necessarily get along with. That's the nature of how this works. Brian Kelly has 120 players on his football team. Assistant coaches, support staffers. And he's been doing this for 33 years. There is no doubt, none whatsoever, that you could go find disgruntled people associated with the LSU program over the last 3 years or into the third season since Brian Kelly's been here that would say negative things, undeniably. You can absolutely find it the same way that if you want to find someone to say something negative about a teacher or a coach, it's a numbers game. When you're a teacher and you teach for 30 years and you've got 100, 150 students a year, thereabouts, over 3 decades, I mean, thousands of students have come through your classes. Someone is not going to like you, and you could find that someone to say bad things. The flip side is I could also find dozens and dozens and dozens of players that would speak glowingly about Brian Kelly, both from his time at Notre Dame, at LSU, you go back to Cincinnati, or any of the places that he's been. It's the nature of that job. What I will tell you is this. There is a complete and total cultural and accountability difference at LSU. It doesn't just have to be my opinion being around the program. How about this? From the time spring ball ended until the start of fall camp, you didn't hear a single thing, a single negative story about an LSU player off the field. The Trey Holly situation was prior, and Trey Holly has staunchly maintained his innocence. There was the Javen Toviano story that happened right before the start of fall camp. One. Look at Georgia. They've had an unsightly number of players arrested for traffic violations after there was a tragic incident where people literally died involving a former player and staff member. Does Kirby Smart have a cultural issue at Georgia? Again, if you paint with a broad brush, you're going to touch something. But Brian Kelly, when he opened up his media availability on Monday, he talked about where this team is culturally, with their habits, with their growth, and used the South Carolina game as an example and an illustration of it. Now, this clip runs 1 minute and 43 seconds. And I'm going to play it in its entirety for a reason. Normally, I would cut this up and play a smaller clip of it, but I want to play the entire thing for you because it's only fair. Again, Brian Kelly, this wasn't a response to a question. This was something he felt was important to open his press conference by saying. So I'm not going to take what he said and clip it. I'm going to give you the entirety of what Brian Kelly said about the culture and what that win said about where his program is. Then you can decide how you react to it. I am going to come back because there's 3 different things in this bite that he talks about that I want to address. So I hope you'll listen to it in entirety and pay attention because I'm going to circle back to 3 specific things he talks about in this clip.
To win games like that, you have to understand habits have a lot to do with it. Winning's a habit and losing's a habit. And if you have losing habits, you can't win those games. This group has the right habits. Now we have to be able to clean up the things technically. And they really come down to 3 things. Personnel, the coaching of the schemes themselves. Are we in the right schemes for our players? And then the preparation of such. And so it's one of those 3 things, and so we have to consider all those 3 things moving forward relative to the personnel, the schemes themselves, and certainly the preparation. And that's the work that's in front of us. We have to continue to work towards that. And look, when you have 2 first-year coordinators, they're learning their personnel, who they want to use, who are the best 11 in each situation. And then what schemes put us in the best position to succeed. And then now we'll have to go and prepare accordingly. And, I wish we could have done that in preseason camp, but we didn't know a lot about, who were those best players for that situation. And it's becoming a lot clearer. I think we're a lot closer to finding those things out. And we continue to look for, getting better in those areas. So
I mentioned there's 3 things Brian Kelly said there that I want to talk about. The habits, the 3 things, as he said, the personnel, the coaching, and the preparation, and then not having those answers in fall camp. I have thoughts on it, and I want to address it, and we'll get to that right when we come back on Locked on LSU, your team every day. Hey, Locked on LSU fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You. And ROY is a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before. It allows you to make contributions directly to your favorite athletes. So by supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As you know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. ROY changes the game, the NIL game, for fans. So here's why ROY is different. Number one, you can directly support players. You can directly back your favorite college athletes. Number two, it allows you exclusive content access. So when fans contribute to a successful campaign, you get access to exclusive content from the athletes, such as their announcement decision, behind the scenes footage, other personal reflections, things like that. There's no risk contribution. I think this is the biggest one. Fan contributions are securely held and are only distributed if the athlete makes the decision that aligns with the fan support. If not, the money is returned to you, the fan. And of course, you can engage with athletes during their NIL journey. So download ROY. Go at iOS or Android. Enter the referral code Locked On, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes for $5,000 cash. All you got to do is visit roy.com for additional details. I'm sorry, visit joinroy.com. Joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get the ROY app for iOS and Android and start making an impact on your favorite team. Use the referral code Locked On for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get off the sideline and get into the NIL game with ROY. All right, so I mentioned that Brian Kelly in that soundbite had, and I get it, guys, like LSU's getting ready to play UCLA this weekend. This feels like maybe an offseason topic, but this was sort of birthed out of this press conference. It was so weird listening to Brian Kelly's press conference because usually it's newsy things. It's what's the injury situation? Are you making personnel changes? This was much more existential, so to speak. Number one, Brian Kelly talked about habits. And I think that comment right there is counter to the idea that Brian Kelly isn't a cultural fit or that the players aren't responding to Brian Kelly. In some respects, I agree with him. You were down 17 in the first quarter and you didn't give up. You fought back and you won the game. Now, he did mention the 3 things: personnel, coaching, and preparation. I look at this and I say, okay, I do agree from the standpoint that I think clearly your personnel has got to improve. It has to improve. And that's a big part of recruiting and what's happening with this program right now. And I think they're going to get there. They're going to get there, and it's very evident by the 2025 class. Look, you've got DJ Pickett, the number 1 cornerback in the country. He's going to be on your team next year, and he's going to be the best cornerback on your team. You've got 4 defensive tackles committed already for 2025. Like, you've got elite defensive players up, and like the cavalry's on the way. The coaching part and the preparation part is something that deserves and warrants criticism when your team doesn't perform well. Now, he mentioned 2 new coordinators, and I think there is some validity to that, but ultimately that goes back to making the wrong decision at defensive coordinator when you hired Matt House. Now, Mike Denbrock was an amazing decision. He just took another job, and that's unfortunate, but that happens. And I know the point that's going to get the most, it's the biggest point of contention is going to be Brian Kelly saying, I wish we knew about these things in fall camp. It's why every year when I make a prediction before a season, I tell you that I make my preseason predictions primarily based on two factors: who has the fewest questions against the most manageable schedule. That's what I look at. You want to know why I and many others are high on Ole Miss this year? Where's the questions on the roster? They lost Quinshon Judkins at running back to Ohio State, but Jackson Dart's back. You got your offensive line returning. You even attacked offensive line in the portal. Your best wide receiver returns. You got talent up and down the defensive side of the ball, and you went and addressed in the portal with guys like Walter Nolan, Princey, the kid from Florida, the defensive from Florida, his name I'll never pronounce. They just didn't have questions. And they had a really easy schedule, a relatively easy schedule for the SEC. When you look at LSU, it was the inverse. You had major questions on the defensive line, major questions at linebacker. You were having wholesale change in your secondary as well. Your offense, you had very few questions. But on the defensive side of the ball, after you're the worst defense in the history of the program, you had lots of questions on that side of the ball. And so, yes, you would have loved to have had those answers in fall camp, but you have a new defensive coordinator. You're trying different players at different positions, and you're not really going to learn until you go play games. And by the way, that's not unique to LSU. I'll remind you, a year ago, Alabama went into their early season with a quarterback shuffle until finally, after they got a scare by South Florida and lost to Texas, they settled on Jalen Milroe and rode him the rest of the season. So it's not like it's something that's unique to LSU that you go through the first month of the season, try to figure yourself out. And I'll say this again. If LSU finds a way to beat USC in that opener, if the little pass that Nuss, all else equal, Nuss hits that pass in the flat to Aaron Anderson, he scores and LSU wins, we're not having this conversation. It's why I always say winning masks deficiencies, losing magnifies them. And that's all that happened with a close loss in Las Vegas. If you found a way to win that game late, nobody is having this conversation, despite the fact that those flaws would still exist. But Brian Kelly was asked about that. And he got a little testy as well when he was pushed about the way his team played in a road win.
We beat South Carolina on the road in a sold-out stadium in the SEC against the team that beat the pants off of Kentucky, who played Georgia right to the end. So if we want to do that game, I guess we're going to beat Georgia by a lot, if that's how you guys want to play this thing. The reality of it is it's hard to win on the road. And given the fact that we made a lot of mistakes, we still found a way to win that football game.
He's not wrong. They found a way to win a game on the road when they got down 17-0, had a lot going against them, and they found their way back. They did. He's right. That happened. And that part should be celebrated. But you got to fix the what caused you to be down 17-0. And Brian Kelly, by the way, that answer was split into two parts. This is the other part where he's pretty adamant in thinking that his defense isn't far off from being good.
That was a good defense. We scored 36 points, and I think everybody watched the game. We didn't score inside the 5 twice. You just score those 2 touchdowns, which are, I think, an 87 or 88% chance of scoring touchdowns in that area. That's 50 points. So we're not that far off. We're not that far off. And if we make the 2 plays that we should make, just, being fundamentally sound on the 2 run plays, we're going to give up less than 250 yards in total offense. So we're really close. And I'm not here to make you guys feel better. You guys are going to evaluate it and write the way you write it. But I know what we see, and I know how we feel about what we need to do. We left 14 points out there and could have scored a lot more and scored 36 on the road when we were down. We took control of the game in the second half with all those mistakes.
He's right. They did. They rallied from 17 down. They were down 8 at the half, and they came back and won the football game. But You can't say if we score inside the 5. You can't say if we don't give up the 2 long runs. You didn't score inside the 5, and you did give up the 2 long runs. So while I understand from a coach's perspective, he's going to go to his team and say, guys, you were in a dogfight, you won the game, and look, execute these plays at the goal line, we blow them out. Look, have the right run fits defensively, and you don't give up these long runs, we blow them out. And he's not wrong. But those are things that we've consistently seen. The first drive of this season, you got down to the 1-yard line and couldn't score. That's a symptom now through 3 games that you haven't fixed. The 2 long runs, you gave up a 67-yard touchdown run against Nichols a week prior. That's something that continues to happen. Clearly, you didn't fix it. So, listen, I am staunchly in the category of teams are allowed to improve. You've heard me say that before. Yes, it is a long season from week 1 to week 12 or 13 or 14 when there's 2 byes, game 1 to game 12. Teams improve. You should improve as the season goes along. Young players should get better. I think Deshaun Spears, who just is playing his most significant action this last weekend, his first road game in the league, by the time November rolls around, he's going to be a veteran player. He should improve. Yes, Caden Durham, the more reps he gets, should continue to improve. Yes, you're going to improve as a team. I absolutely believe that. I also believe that this team has flaws that they got to fix. And there's some flaws we've seen now in each of the first 3 games, which makes you think maybe it's not scheme. Maybe you just don't have the players to be good enough yet. And that's the reality LSU may have to face as the season goes along. One more quickly from Brian Kelly, who, you know what, actually, we'll knock out our final break here. And when I come back, there's 2 things I want to let you hear. Kelly was asked point blank, is Caden Durham now your bell cow? We'll get to that. But he was asked about the defensive line. And this answer surprised me because Brian Kelly didn't blame his defensive line for the defensive issues. He blamed another position group. And I'll get to that next. Locked on LSU, presented by FanDuel. Love telling you about our friends over at FanDuel, and you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Again, visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel, proud partner of us here on Locked on LSU. So Brian Kelly, when meeting with the media on Monday, was asked specifically about the defensive line. And remember, this is the first game after Jacoby and Guillory's injury. You've made some changes. You kicked Paris Shand inside. Ahmad Bros played a lot. And we saw, again, 2 gash run plays for touchdowns. But Brian Kelly didn't blame his defensive front.
When we all thought that, our defensive tackles were going to be a problem for us, they're playing fundamentally sound football for us. Our ends, Swinson was named the SEC Defensive Player of the Week. Savion Jones is playing really well. Gabe Relaford is playing as a true freshman. Womack was hurt. We'll get him back. He adds to the depth. We were able to move Paris Shand inside to help with that. That front is doing very well. And then we know about the talented 3 linebackers. It's about continuing to build the back end of our defense and continue to contest catches, be sound in run support with our secondary. But more than anything else is create havoc. And we did that. We got the ball out. We came up with turnovers. We came up with key stops. Obviously, we talked about the bad snap. We come up with a field goal stop right there, which was huge in the game. We get the interception from Zai. So there's a lot going on there. We're not there yet. There's no doubt. But we are making the progress necessary with the group of guys that we have. We're making the kind of progress where I feel like we're not there yet, but we're getting closer.
He acknowledged before the season he thought the defensive – he was very careful with how he said it. defensive tackle was going to be a problem, but he feels like they're playing well. Defensive ends have been very good. We've talked about that a lot, and he likes the talent of linebacker. The point he made point blank was the secondary has got to improve. And that's interesting because I think most of us would look at LSU's defensive front. We'd look at the secondary because we saw what happened a year ago. We watched the LSU pass defense, 108th in the country in pass defense, and looked and said, my goodness, there's receivers running free in the secondary every single game. There's defensive backs with their hands in the air, pointing at each other. And through 3 games, y'all, we have not seen that. They have eliminated the gigantic coverage bust by simplifying what they're doing in the secondary. So it's a little surprising to hear Brian Kelly say the spot where they have to improve is still in the back end of the defense. But clearly, they're looking at things differently than you and I might be looking at them. The havoc part, he's right. LSU had 5 sacks, 9 TFLs, forced 4 fumbles. You got Zy Alexander's interception. Deshaun Spears got an interception on the 2-point conversion attempt. You did cause havoc against South Carolina, and it's a big reason that you won the game. And I think Brian Kelly's telling you that's probably going to be their formula. They probably don't have the dudes this year to be awesome at every level of the defense, but what they can do is play fundamentally sound football, and when they have the opportunity, create havoc, which might turn into negative plays for the offense or turnovers to benefit LSU. It's probably just going to be stylistically different from what we all hoped. The ceiling for this defense is just not very high, but can they be opportunistic? I think that's probably what you're going to look for, unless if some of these young guys can really come along in the second half of the season, or as we move through it's only 3 games in, so you still got 75% of your regular season to go. All right, last thing, speaking of young guys, Brian Kelly was asked about Caden Durham. What a day Caden Durham had. And if he has earned the right to be RB1 after his performance against South Carolina.
Yeah, I think that's yet to be determined. I don't think we're at a point where, he's going to be the guy. I think we're still going to have all of those guys that are going to be part of it, but he certainly saw the things that we were looking for. Look, they were running some things inside with their tackles that were kind of cutting off our combination blocks, which required patience to bounce at, and he really saw it well and was able to, obviously get the ball outside. And, that's, you can't teach that, right? I mean, you can talk about it, you can say, hey, this is what you need to do, but you got to just naturally see it. And so the vision, the wherewithal to do that in game, obviously is a positive for him moving forward.
He didn't say no. He effectively said, we're just not going to crown him yet after 1 game where he carried 11 times for more than 90 yards. Look, Caden Durham was awesome. He was exactly what Brian Kelly said a week ago. They need backs who are on scholarship too to realize you got to make a guy miss, or you got to be able to break a tackle. And if you made it to the end of the episode, I'm going to give you this little nugget from Pro Football Focus. And this was the stat that I was waiting on yesterday when we were recording the episode. I wanted to know Caden Durham's yards after contact. And according to Pro Football Focus, Caden Durham, who had 98 yards rushing, 50 of his 98 yards came after contact for an average of 4.55 yards per carry after contact. Caden Durham was awesome. The first guy never got him on the ground. It was shades of Clyde Edwards-Helaire in 2019. I'm not saying he's going to be all SEC. I'm not saying he's going to be a first-round pick. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is style, build, etc. looked a lot like Clyde did in 2019. And if Caden Durham can find some of that consistently, that might be the missing piece to this offense once you get Chris Hilton back. Because the 2 things you're lacking are your true deep threat in the passing game. And Hilton fixes that. That's the second he's back on the field, he fixes that. And maybe Caden Durham is the tough back that you needed, who can break tackles, get those tough yards after contact as well. You check those 2 boxes, this offense becomes mighty lethal. Okay, that's going to do it for us here on Locked On LSU. Now that you've made it to the end of the episode, for your first listen, thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen. Now for your second listen, go find Locked On College Football. It's linked in the description here. So make sure you go check it out. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. A great podcast. Of course, hey, thanks for being here. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review if you're on YouTube. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And be sure to let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.